My husband moved his mistress into our lake house, so I locked them both outside. If you came home and found your spouse moving someone else into your property, what would you do? Now, here is how it all began. The first thing Nia noticed was not the woman in her kitchen, but the fact that the woman was wearing her robe. Late August lights spilled across the Lake Oconee water in sheets of silver as Nia stood just inside the front door, one hand still wrapped around the key, her breath caught somewhere between her lungs and her throat. The house smelled wrong. Citrus perfume, fresh coffee, Marcus's cedar cologne layered beneath both. Somewhere in the living room, music played softly from a speaker she had bought years ago, and for half a second the ordinary sound made the scene feel even crueler. Then the woman turned from the kitchen island. Black, beautiful, maybe mid-30s, barefoot on Nia's oak floor, wearing the white cotton robe Nia kept hanging behind the upstairs bathroom door. A navy overnight bag rested beside the stairs. Women's sandals sat neatly under the console table. A second toothbrush stood beside Marcus's in the downstairs bathroom, visible from where Nia had passed it moments earlier. None of those things hurt as much as the cardboard box near the staircase. Nia recognized her own handwriting across the top. Winter linens. She had labeled it years ago. Now it held framed photographs, 2 books from the living room shelves, and the small ceramic bowl that usually sat beneath the entry mirror. Her things had not been misplaced. They had been removed. Marcus appeared behind the woman a moment later, barefoot too, shirt untucked, holding a coffee mug. He stopped when he saw Nia, but there was no guilt in his face. No shock, only irritation, as if she had interrupted a meeting. You weren't supposed to be here this weekend. The sentence landed harder than an apology would have. Nia's fingers tightened around the key until its teeth pressed into her palm. 9 years of marriage stood between them, but Marcus looked past her toward the open door, already calculating inconvenience. The woman glanced at him, waiting. Nia, Marcus said, lowering his voice, don't make a scene. Nia looked at him then. Really looked. At the man who had slept beside her, eaten at her table, brought colleagues here for summer weekends, and accepted every quiet accommodation as if it had been his due. He believed he knew what she would do next. He believed she would swallow the humiliation because she always hated public ugliness more than private pain. The woman drew the robe tighter around herself. Marcus told me you two were basically separated, she said. Nia did not answer her. Her eyes moved instead across the room. One photograph missing from the mantel. Marcus's jackets hanging by the mudroom door. A garment bag draped over a dining chair. A pair of gold earrings beside the kitchen sink. Details. Placement. Absence. Nia spent her working life noticing what belonged in a room and what had been changed. This room had been edited. Marcus stepped closer. We can talk about this later. Nia finally looked down at her phone. He mistook the movement for surrender and exhaled through his nose. Good, he said. She opened the camera. First the sandals, then the overnight bag, then the box containing her photographs. Marcus's expression changed. What are you doing? Nia raised the phone toward the room. Steady now. Looking, she said. The shutter clicked once, sharp and small in the quiet house, and for the first time since she walked through the door, Marcus stopped looking annoyed and started looking uncertain. Marcus's uncertainty lasted less than 3 seconds before irritation returned to his face. Put the phone down, Nia. She didn't. The lake behind him burned white beneath the late afternoon sun, bright enough to turn the windows into mirrors, and in one of them she could see all 3 of them reflected together. Marcus standing between 2 women as if the arrangement itself were something he had the authority to organize. Simone shifted near the kitchen island, still wrapped in Nia's robe, then reached casually for the mug she had left beside the sink. Marcus noticed Nia watching and stepped closer, lowering his voice. You came up here unannounced. Don't act like I staged something against you. Nia's thumb moved once across the screen, saving the last photograph. Did you move her in? She asked. Marcus glanced toward Simone before answering. She's been staying here. That wasn't my question. His jaw tightened. This is our house too, Nia. The word "our" hung between them. Simone looked at Marcus as though the sentence confirmed something she had already been told. Then she crossed toward the hallway table and picked up a small brass key from beside her overnight bag. Nia recognized the shape immediately. Front door. Marcus had given it to her. Simone slipped it into her purse with the unconscious ease of someone who believed she had every right to return. Something cold settled behind Nia's ribs. Marcus followed her gaze and mistook the silence for weakness. I've been coming here for years, he said. I've hosted people here. I've paid for things in this marriage. You don't get to suddenly treat me like some visitor because you're angry. Nia breathed in through her nose. Cedar cologne, coffee, Simone's perfume, her own house, layered over by strangers' choices. And my things? She asked. Marcus shrugged. We needed space. Simone's eyes flicked toward the cardboard box near the stairs. Marcus said you weren't really using the place anymore. That did it. Not visibly. Not yet. But something inside Nia sharpened. She walked past them toward the mantel. The empty rectangle where her framed photograph had stood was outlined faintly in dust. She photographed it. Then the box. Then the key disappearing into Simone's purse. Marcus gave a humorless laugh. What is this? Some evidence folder. Nia looked at him, but said nothing. He stepped onto the deck when she moved outside, following her beneath the slow creak of the ceiling fan. The marriage has been over for a long time, he said. You know that. Does Simone know we're still married? Marcus's expression hardened. Don't embarrass yourself. It was almost impressive, the way he turned every boundary she named into proof that she was irrational. Nia looked past him at the dock, at the water striking the pilings in small, patient beats. She had spent years believing that refusing ugliness kept her above it. Marcus had apparently decided it also made her harmless. She left 20 minutes later without shouting, without touching Simone's belongings, without asking for the key. By the time she reached the county road, her phone lit up. Marcus, you were way out of line today? Another message followed before she answered. Simone is staying there. You need to accept that things have changed. Nia pulled into a safe turnout and typed slowly. I do not consent to Simone occupying the lake house. She read it twice before sending. Marcus replied almost immediately. You can't lock me out of my own house. Nia stared at the last two words until the screen dimmed in her hand. My house. For the first time that afternoon, she almost smiled. By the time Nia reached Atlanta, Marcus had already decided her silence meant he had won the argument. Her phone vibrated twice before she even carried her bag through the front door of the house they still shared as husband and wife. The first message was almost casual. I'm going back up there Friday. The second was sharper. Simone will be with me. Don't turn this into something it isn't. Nia stood in the dim entryway without removing her shoes. Traffic whispered beyond the windows. The lake house photographs were still open on her phone. The second toothbrush, the overnight bag, her framed pictures inside a cardboard box, the empty place on the mantel where Marcus had begun removing evidence of her presence as casually as someone clearing a table after dinner. She read his messages again. He was not asking. He was announcing. That distinction mattered. Marcus had spent years using the lake house because she had welcomed him there, hosting colleagues on the deck, keeping clothes in the bedroom, carrying his own key as naturally as he carried the one to their Atlanta home. Somewhere along the way, he had stopped treating access as something their marriage had given him and started speaking as though the house itself answered to him. Nia sat at the dining table and opened the text thread. She did not argue. She did not threaten him. She took screenshots of the exchange, including the message she had already sent. I do not consent to Simone occupying the lake house. Marcus's response remained beneath it like a signature beneath his own assumption. You can't lock me out of my own house. Nia saved the images with the rest of the photographs she had taken that afternoon. Then she opened an older folder she maintained for her design work and personal property. Years of rooms lived there in quiet images, furniture placement, artwork, shelves, fabrics, the ceramic bowl beneath the entry mirror, the framed photograph Marcus had removed. She was used to documenting spaces before they changed. Usually it was professional habit. Tonight it felt like memory defending itself. She compared an older photograph of the living room with the image she had taken hours earlier. Her things had not simply shifted. Several had been gathered together, boxed, and pushed aside to make room. Marcus had not merely brought Simone into the house. He had started arranging the space as though Nia's absence were already permanent. Another message arrived. You need to stop acting like everything is yours just because your name was there first. Nia stared at that sentence longer than the others. Not because it frightened her. Because Marcus had just revealed the center of his belief without realizing it. She rose, crossed to the cabinet where she kept old financial and property records, and pulled out the purchase file for the lake house. The folder had softened along the edges with age. Inside were closing papers, mortgage records, and the recorded deed copy she had kept since buying the property in 2014. She did not read every page. She only rested her fingertips on the date, then on the name printed beneath it. Her name, years before the wedding, years before Marcus had ever been handed a key. The discovery did not make her triumphant. It made her careful. She knew enough not to confuse one document with the entire universe of what a marriage might allow someone to argue later. But she also knew Marcus's confidence was not verification. Before midnight, Nia opened the public property record contact information for Putnam County and quietly sent a request to confirm the current recorded ownership information for the lake house. Then she placed her phone face down beside the folder. Marcus believed the argument was about whether she could tolerate humiliation. Nia had begun asking a different question entirely. What did the record actually say? The confirmation arrived the next morning without drama, which was exactly what Nia needed. The current property record matched what her old file had shown. The Lake Oconee house was still recorded in her name. She read the confirmation twice at her kitchen table, then set the phone beside the faded purchase folder instead of calling Marcus. There was no triumph in her face, only a slower kind of breathing. For the first time since she had walked in on Simone wearing her robe, the facts around her felt solid again. She did not confuse that record with a magical shield against every argument a marriage could create, but it gave shape to the one thing Marcus had been trying to blur. The house had a history before him. That thought carried her backward 12 years, to a warm evening in 2014 when the place had contained almost nothing. Nia had been 26, sitting alone on a folding chair on the back deck with a takeout carton balanced on one knee. The walls inside were bare. The dock creaked whenever the water pushed beneath it. She had spent most of the afternoon wiping dust from cabinets and measuring windows, then eaten dinner while the sun lowered behind the trees. There had been no one to impress. No party waiting. No husband yet. Just a young woman looking across the lake at something she had managed to build room by room, payment by payment, decision by decision. Years later, when Marcus first stood in that same doorway, he had looked around with open admiration. By then they were in love. He had laughed when she handed him a key after they married and said, "So this is officially ours now?" Nia had smiled and answered, "That's what marriage is supposed to feel like." She remembered the warmth in his face when she said it. She remembered meaning every word. After that, she stopped correcting people when they called it Marcus and Nia's lake house. She stocked the refrigerator before his work weekends there. She rearranged furniture when he wanted to host colleagues. Once, during a summer gathering, Marcus had been pulled into a tense call on the deck while guests were arriving, and Nia quietly took over everything inside: food, drinks, seating, introductions, so no one saw the stress gathering behind his smile. Later, when one of his colleagues complimented him on putting together a great weekend, Nia had only touched his arm and smiled. She did not need the credit. At the time, that felt like partnership. Over the years, though, Marcus began treating her lack of claims as evidence that there was nothing to claim. When she avoided arguments, he called her passive. When she made space for his work, he called the house part of his life. When she stopped insisting on the difference between mine and ours, he stopped remembering there had ever been one. Sitting at the Atlanta table now, Nia opened the personal purchase file again. The mortgage records were there with the closing papers she had kept since 2014. She ran one finger down the first page, stopping at the date. It brought back something Marcus had said the day she first gave him a key. He had held it up between them and grinned. "You trust me that much?" Nia had answered without hesitation. "A key means I trust you to come in." The memory landed differently now. She looked at the old key ring resting beside the folder and understood, with a clarity that almost hurt, that trust had always been the permission. Marcus had simply decided it was ownership. The property record did not give Nia a weapon. It gave her a boundary she could finally see clearly. She sat at her dining table with the documents she already possessed spread in front of her: the recorded deed copy, the original mortgage and closing papers from 2014, the dated photographs of the lake house, and the text thread in which Marcus had declared, "You can't lock me out of my own house." The pattern was simpler than his confidence made it sound. Nia had bought the property before she ever met Marcus. The deed had remained in her name. The mortgage had remained in her name. Marriage had given Marcus a life with her. and she had voluntarily given him keys and years of unrestricted family use, but none of that had placed his name on the recorded title. Nia was careful not to turn that fact into something larger than it was. She knew a divorce could still require disclosure, accounting, and arguments about marital finances if either of them raised legitimate issues. A deed did not make every marital question disappear. But Marcus had crossed a different line. He was treating permission to enter as authority to decide who could live there. Worse, he knew the distinction existed. Years earlier, while they were sorting household paperwork after the wedding, Marcus had held the lake house purchase folder and joked that he had married into prime waterfront real estate. Nia had laughed and told him plainly, "Your name isn't on that deed, Marcus. You have a key because you're my husband." He had kissed her forehead and answered, "Close enough." At the time, she had heard affection. Now she heard the beginning of the mistake. His name had never been added. No later document in her file changed that. Yet somewhere between access, marriage, and habit, Marcus had decided close enough meant the difference no longer mattered. Her phone buzzed beside the deed. The message was from Simone. For several seconds, Nia only stared at the name. Then she opened it. There was no apology, only a question and a screenshot from a conversation between Simone and Marcus. In Marcus's message, he had written, "Once everything settles, the lake place is where we can finally have our own space." Simone's text beneath the screenshot was short. "He told me this was basically his too. Is that true?" Nia did not answer immediately. She looked from the screenshot to Marcus's earlier message to her, "My own house," and understood that the same claim had been shaped differently for two different women. To Nia, he used marriage as authority. To Simone, he used confidence as proof. Nia finally typed, "The property is recorded in my name. I bought it before Marcus and I met." She stopped there. No insult. No legal speech. No demand that Simone believe her. A minute passed. Then Simone replied, "He said you couldn't stop him from using it." That message did not make Simone innocent, and Nia did not mistake it for remorse. But it confirmed something important. Marcus had not merely misunderstood his own access in private. He had built promises to another woman on that misunderstanding. Nia saved the screenshot Simone had voluntarily sent, placing it with the records already forming around the dispute. Everything important was now on the table. The title history, the purchase chronology, the photographs showing her belongings displaced, Marcus's messages dismissing her objection, and his own words to Simone describing a future he did not have authority to promise. For the first time, Nia could see exactly where the conflict would turn. Marcus could raise whatever legitimate marital claim he believed he had through the proper process. What he could no longer do was rely on everyone accepting his version without checking. And by moving Simone in after Nia had objected, he had made verification unavoidable. By the next morning, the shape of Marcus's plan no longer looked like a reckless affair. It looked like repetition. Nia sat at the edge of her bed with her phone in one hand and the lake house photographs open in the other, moving backward through what had already happened. Simone's sandals by the console. Her overnight bag near the stairs. The second toothbrush. Nia's photographs boxed away. Marcus saying, "This is our house too." Then his text, "Simone is staying there. You need to accept that things have changed." None of it required a secret agreement or some elaborate scheme. That was what made it worse. Marcus was trying to make his version of reality feel ordinary before Nia could challenge it. First, Simone stayed for a weekend. Then she left clothes. Then she received a key. Then Nia's belongings were pushed aside. Then Marcus spoke as though the house belonged to a future he had already chosen. If enough days passed, if enough objects moved, if enough people heard him call it his, he could turn occupation into a story and a story into pressure. He understood one part of the truth. He had used the lake house openly throughout the marriage. He had hosted people there. He had kept clothes there. Nia had trusted him with unrestricted access for years. Those facts were real. His mistake was believing those facts gave him the final authority to decide who could occupy the property, and believing Nia's reluctance to create scenes meant she would never force the distinction into the open. His message to Simone made the pattern even clearer. Once everything settles, the lake place is where we can finally have our own space. He had not promised her a weekend. He had promised permanence. And when Simone asked Nia whether Marcus could really do that, Nia saw the larger betrayal for what it was. Marcus had been using her silence as part of his sales pitch. To Simone, He could say the marriage was effectively over. To Nia, he could say she had no right to object. If Nia reacted emotionally, Marcus could point to the reaction instead of the facts. If she stayed quiet, he could treat quiet as consent. So Nia chose a third option. She opened the same text thread she had already preserved and wrote slowly. I am stating this clearly in writing. I do not consent to Simone Reed occupying the Lake Oconee property, and I do not consent to you treating that property as a residence for her. She read the message twice before sending it. No threat, no insult, no prediction about court. Just a boundary Marcus could not later pretend he had misunderstood. His response arrived 12 minutes later. You're being dramatic. You don't get to erase 9 years because you're jealous. Nia stared at the word jealous until the heat in her chest cooled. Marcus still believed this was about another woman. That was useful. He had not understood that Nia had stopped arguing about the affair and started watching what he did with authority he did not actually possess. Another message followed. We're going back Friday. If you want to talk, be there. Nia looked at the calendar. Friday. Lake Oconee. The same house where he had moved Simone in. The same place where he had called himself owner without using the word deed once. She could have answered immediately. She could have warned him what she knew. Instead, she locked her phone and stood at the window, watching Atlanta traffic move below in clean lines of red and white. Marcus wanted the conversation on the property because he believed the setting favored him. He wanted Simone beside him because he believed confidence looked more convincing with an audience. Nia understood something he did not. If he repeated the same claims there, in front of Simone, after receiving her written objection, he would no longer be able to call the conflict a misunderstanding. He would be choosing the claim out loud. Nia picked up her phone again and sent only 4 words. I'll be there Friday. Marcus arrived at Lake Oconee Friday afternoon, believing the hardest part of the weekend would be forcing Nia to accept what he had already decided. Simone sat beside him in the passenger seat, sunglasses pushed into her hair, an overnight bag and garment bag visible through the rear window. The lake flashed between the pines as Marcus turned into the drive, slowed beside the house, and parked exactly where he always parked. Nia was already there. She stood on the front porch in dark jeans and a pale blouse, one hand resting loosely against the railing, her expression unreadable. Marcus got out without greeting her. Simone followed more slowly. He walked straight to the front door, pulled his key from the ring, and inserted it into the lock. It would not turn. He frowned and tried again. Metal scraped against metal. Nothing. Nia. She stayed where she was. Marcus pulled the key out, examined it, then shoved it back in harder. What did you do? I changed the access. His head snapped toward her. You changed the locks? After I told you in writing that Simone was not authorized by me to occupy this property. Simone's eyes moved from Marcus to the door. Marcus gave a short laugh that carried no humor. You cannot lock me out of my own house. The words came louder this time, spilling beyond the porch into the still afternoon. Nia did not rush to answer. She let the sentence sit where he had placed it. Marcus stepped closer. I've been coming here for 9 years. My clothes are inside. I've hosted people here. I've paid for things in this marriage. I know. Her calm seemed to anger him more than denial would have. Then opened the door. Nia looked past him at Simone, who was now standing beside the car with her arms folded. Marcus, Nia said quietly, whose name is on the deed. Something changed in his face. Not fear. Calculation. He had enough truth to build an argument around. The marriage, the years of access, the weekends, the fact that Nia had treated the property as shared family space. He believed those facts should outweigh whatever paper she was thinking about. We're married, he said. That house has been part of our marriage for almost a decade. That wasn't my question. Simone lowered her arms. Marcus pointed toward the door. You don't get to stand there and act like I'm some stranger trespassing on your life. Nia's voice remained even. And you don't get to answer a title question with a relationship. His jaw tightened. This is exactly what you do. You hide behind technicalities instead of dealing with reality. Reality is why I asked you whose name is on the deed. Marcus turned toward Simone as though expecting reinforcement. She's trying to punish me because the marriage is over. Simone glanced at Nia, then back at him. You told me the house was basically yours too. It is. The answer came too quickly. Nia said nothing. Marcus continued, louder now, as if volume could complete the missing authority. I have every right to be here. I have every right to use this house. She cannot decide by herself that I suddenly don't belong here. Nia let him finish. She had spent years interrupting herself so Marcus could remain comfortable. Not today. If you believe you have a legal claim arising from the marriage, she said, you can make it through the proper process. But you received my written objection, and you still brought Simone back here intending to stay. Marcus looked toward the bags in the car, then at Simone, realizing too late how neatly his own actions matched Nia's words. Open the damn door. Nia did not move. Marcus pulled out his phone. Fine. We'll settle this right now. He made the call himself. By the time a sheriff's cruiser rolled slowly into the drive, the sun had dropped lower over the water. Deputy Elijah Brooks stepped out, took in the locked door, the luggage, Marcus's useless key, and the three people standing apart from one another. All right, he said, calm and procedural. Who owns the property? Nia reached for the property record she had brought with her. Marcus opened his mouth first. Her name is on a piece of paper, Marcus said before Nia could answer. But this has been our house for years. Deputy Brooks looked at him, then at Nia. Do you have the property record with you? Nia handed over the copy she had already brought. Brooks did not react dramatically. He read the name, checked the property description, then looked at the date. 2014. His eyes moved back to Nia. And you're Nia Carter? She showed her identification. Marcus stepped closer. We're married. I've had a key for 9 years. Brooks nodded once. I hear you. Marcus seemed encouraged. So she can't just decide this is suddenly only hers. Brooks looked down at the record again. What I can tell you from what you've shown me is that the recorded title lists her. I'm not here to settle whatever claims either of you may raise in a divorce. The sentence changed the air. Marcus crossed his arms. That doesn't mean I have no rights. I didn't say that. Brooks handed the record back to Nia. If you believe you have a marital property claim, that's something you pursue through the proper civil process. But possession of a key and years of use are not the same thing as your name appearing on recorded title. Simone had gone completely still beside the car. Marcus looked at her, then back at Brooks. She gave me access. I've stayed here whenever I wanted. Nia spoke for the first time. Because I allowed it. Marcus laughed sharply. Allowed it? Listen to yourself. Nia took out her phone. She did not wave it at him. She simply opened the text thread and showed Brooks the message she had sent before Friday. I do not consent to Simone Reed occupying the Lake Oconee property, and I do not consent to you treating that property as a residence for her. Beneath it sat Marcus's response calling her dramatic, followed by a statement that he and Simone were returning anyway. Brooks read the exchange. So you received this before coming back today? Marcus's expression tightened. She doesn't get to dictate everything by text. That's not what I asked. Marcus glanced away. Yes, I got it. Simone suddenly reached into her purse for her own phone. Marcus. He turned. Her voice had lost the smooth certainty Nia remembered from the kitchen. You told me this was basically yours. It is. No. Simone unlocked the screen and pulled up the message she had already sent Nia days earlier. Once everything settles, the lake place is where we can finally have our own space. She held the phone toward him. You told me we could live here. Marcus's mouth opened, then closed. I said once everything's settled. You never said you weren't on the deed. Because that wasn't the point. Nia watched something fracture behind Simone's eyes. Not innocence, exactly, but certainty. Marcus had sold 2 different women 2 different versions of the same authority, and now both versions were standing beside a recorded date that existed before he did. Brooks remained calm. Here's where we are. I'm not making a divorce ruling in this driveway. I'm not deciding every possible financial claim between spouses. But I am not going to treat Mr. Carter as the recorded owner based on his statement alone when the property record presented here identifies Ms. Carter. Marcus pointed toward the house. My belongings are inside. Then arrangements can be made to retrieve personal belongings without turning this into a confrontation. Marcus stared at the dead key in his hand. For the first time, he seemed to understand what had actually stopped working. Not the metal, the assumption behind it. Nia had not taken ownership from him. The record showed he had never held recorded title to begin with. And until he pursued whatever legitimate marital claim he believed he had through the proper process, he could no longer continue treating the lake house as though his access gave him authority to move Simone in and decide the matter himself. The consequences were quieter than Marcus had expected, and that was exactly why they stayed with him. He was not arrested. No judge appeared in the driveway. No one stripped him of every possible claim with a dramatic sentence. Instead, the immediate problem became ordinary and procedural. Arrangements were made for Marcus to collect his personal belongings from the lake house without turning the property into another confrontation, and whatever financial or marital claims remained between him and Nia were left for the proper separation and divorce process. Simone left that afternoon with her overnight bag still in the car. She did not make a scene either. Before getting into the passenger seat, she looked once at Marcus, then at the house, as if measuring the distance between what he had promised and what the record had actually shown. Nia did not enjoy that look. She did not need Simone humiliated to feel whole. When Marcus later asked for a time to retrieve his clothes and personal items, Nia agreed to a reasonable arrangement. She did not keep his things as leverage. She did not destroy them, sell them, or force him to beg for what was his. The house had already become the place where Marcus confused access with ownership. Nia refused to make the same mistake in reverse. Weeks passed. The separation became real in ways arguments never had. Their conversations narrowed to logistics. The emotional noise that had once filled every room began to disappear. Nia returned to Lake Oconee alone on a cool Saturday morning with cardboard boxes waiting near the stairs. The house was silent except for wind moving through the pines and water tapping softly against the dock. She opened the first box Marcus had packed. Her framed photograph was inside, wrapped carelessly in a dish towel. She cleaned the glass and placed it back on the mantel. The books returned to the shelf. The ceramic bowl went beneath the entry mirror. Small things, restored without ceremony. Upstairs, the white robe still hung behind the bathroom door. Nia stood looking at it for several seconds. Simone had worn it, but that was not the reason Nia folded it into a donation bag. The robe belonged to an earlier version of herself, the woman who had believed being calm meant absorbing every insult without changing the rules around her. That woman had confused endurance with dignity almost as badly as Marcus had confused permission with possession. Near sunset, Marcus arrived for the last of his belongings. He stood outside while Nia brought the final box to the porch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked past her toward the lake. You really changed everything over this. Nia rested one hand on the edge of the box. No, she said quietly. I stopped pretending nothing had changed. Marcus looked at her, as if waiting for the anger he still understood better than calm. It never came. He lifted the box, nodded once, and walked back toward his car. Nia watched until the taillights disappeared between the trees, then closed the door. The lock turned with a soft mechanical click. Months earlier, Marcus had believed her silence meant she could be erased from her own life. Now the house was quiet, her name still where the record had always placed it, and the key he once treated like ownership no longer opened the door.